the dimensional barrier did not break cleanly. That was the part Roland would spend the next several hours attempting to explain to anyone who asked, and the explanation would never fully satisfy him, because the mathematics of what happened simply did not have a framework in the UNSC's entire scientific database. A slip-space rupture produced a predictable set of phenomena: energy discharge, spatial distortion along measurable vectors, emergence into real space at coordinates that could be plotted retroactively even when the navigation had failed. What happened above Middle-earth was not a rupture in any sense the database recognized. It was something closer to an invitation answered before the recipient understood the question. The Infinity's damaged drive responding to a signal it had no architecture to identify, a pull that operated not on the ship's navigation systems, but on the ship itself, as if the vessel had mass and the signal had gravity, and the distance between them had simply, suddenly, ceased to matter. The barrier tore open at 40,000 feet above the Pelennor fields. Roland registered the emergence in the first millisecond and spent the next 300 milliseconds doing something he almost never did, which was running his damage assessment 3 times before accepting the results, because the results were not results he had models for. Real space confirmation, verified. Stellar cartography, no match. Atmospheric composition, breathable, nitrogen-oxygen, pre-industrial particulate profile, gravitational constant, standard, electromagnetic spectrum, functional but strange, threaded through with energies his sensors could detect but not classify, resonances that didn't correspond to any known physics, and sat in his monitoring architecture like words in a language he could almost read. Below them, a battlefield, and not a recent battlefield. The dead were hours old, the fires burning down to their last breath. The mud of the Pelennor churned into a geography of what violence looked like when it had been given enough time and enough bodies to work with. Roland's optical systems mapped it in the 2 seconds before the Infinity's emergency descent protocols engaged. A city behind enormous walls, a river dark with debris, plains extending in every direction, and to the east, visible even through the smoke, a mountain that was not erupting in any geological sense, but was producing light from its peak. A beam of it, white and searching, sweeping the horizon with the patience of something that had been looking for a very long time and had not yet found what it was looking for. The Infinity hit the Pelennor at a shallow angle, which was the only reason 17,000 people survived the landing. Roland had managed the descent with everything available to him. Emergency thrusters, gravitational compensators running at 200% of rated capacity. The structural integrity fields doing work they had been designed to do in combat rather than planetary impact. The ship carved a furrow through the Pelennor 11 kilometers long and 40 meters deep, scattering the remnants of Sauron's defeated army from the field's southern quarter in a shockwave that Roland estimated had been audible in Minas Tirith from the moment of first contact. Then the Mac cannon's primary firing mechanism sheared off in the first 3 seconds of impact. Pelican Bays 2, 3, and 4 collapsed inward. The port shield grid dropped to 38% and stayed there. The Infinity came to rest with its bow pointed toward the mountains of Mordor. Roland completed his damage assessment in 4 seconds and delivered it to Lasky in 5. Then he said, quietly, because it was the honest thing to say, "Captain, I have no idea where we are." Master Chief had been in the forward deployment bay when the dimensional barrier tore open, suited and standing in the way that Spartan 2s stood when they were waiting. Not tense, not restless, simply present, occupying the space with the absolute economy of a body that had been trained since childhood to treat readiness as a resting state. The impact had thrown him against the bay wall with a force that would have killed an unaugmented human and left him with a diagnostic alert about his left pauldron's magnetization system that he noted and set aside for later. He had walked out of the forward bay into a world that smelled like iron and ash and something else. Something old. Something that had been in the ground a long time and was in the air the same way history was in old buildings, and soaked into the structure of the place rather than sitting on top of it. The Pelennor stretched around the infinity's crash furrow in every direction. What remained of the battlefield was visible in the middle distance. The detritus of an engagement that Chief's tactical assessment put it somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 combatants, the scale of it staggering even by the standards of a soldier who had fought Covenant fleet actions. The enemy dead were not human. He noted this with the professional attention he gave to new threat assessments. Bipedal, heavily built, crude armor, weapons that were pre-industrial in manufacture but not in effectiveness. The damage patterns on the Allied dead suggested the enemy had been dangerous in mass and vicious in close quarters, not sophisticated, overwhelming. Behind him, the Infinity's surviving personnel were beginning to emerge. ODSTs first, then support crew, a ding. Then the Spartan complement moving in the coordinated dispersal pattern that Palmer had established before the dimensional transit, and that the Spartans were executing as if the crash landing had been a scheduled deployment. Chief watched them fan out across the Pelennor with the specific satisfaction of watching people do their jobs well under conditions that had not been in any briefing document. Palmer appeared at his shoulder. "Roland has no star fix," she said. "We are genuinely nowhere he can identify." "I know," Chief said. "The MAC is down. 3 Pelican bays are gone. We have 1 bay functional, which gives us 6 Pelicans operational." She paused. "And there's something else." "Tell me." "The weapon has been running analysis since emergence. She says there's an energy signature in the local environment that she's never encountered. Distributed, atmospheric, like background radiation, but biological in character. It's in the ground, in the air, in the water. She says it responds to intention, that it appears to be stronger near certain individuals and weaker near others, and that the differential correlates with... Palmer paused in the way she paused when she was about to say something she found professionally awkward. She says it correlates with what she can only describe as moral weight. Chief processed this. "Magic," he said. She didn't use that word. She was being precise, Chief said. "I'm being efficient." The rider appeared from the direction of the city at a gallop, alone, on a horse that covered the distance between Minas Tirith's gate and the Infinity's crash site, in a time that suggested the horse was either exceptional or terrified, and had decided that speed was the appropriate response to both conditions. The rider pulled up 30 meters from Chief and looked down at him from the saddle with the expression of a person who had seen a great many things in a long life and was in the process of adding this to the list. He was old, not fragile. Old. Old in the way that certain things were old, the way mountains were old, with the specific density of something that had been accumulating substance over a very long time and had not lost any of it. White robes, a staff, a hat that had survived more than it had any structural right to. His eyes were the particular gray of a sky that couldn't decide between storm and clarity, and had settled on both simultaneously. He looked at Chief for a long moment. Chief looked back. "You are not from this world," the old man said. It was not a question. "No," Chief said. "Your vessel—" The old man glanced at the infinity, 11 kilometers of crashed warship sitting in the Pelennor mud with its running lights still active, and arrived with considerable force. "We didn't choose the landing." "No," the old man said thoughtfully. "I don't imagine you did." He studied Chief's armor with the attention of someone who was seeing something new and was deciding how to file it. "You are a warrior." "Yes." "A very large one." He seemed to find this mildly satisfying. "I am Gandalf. I have been expecting something, though I confess I did not know precisely what form it would take." He looked at the mountains of Mordor, at the beam of light still sweeping from Baraddur's peak. "The eye has seen your arrival. Sauron knows something has changed. He does not yet know what to make of it." He paused. "Neither, entirely, do I. But I have learned, in a long life, that the distinction between miracle and catastrophe is frequently a matter of timing." He looked back at Chief. "I would very much like to know what you are capable of." "That's a long conversation," Chief said. "We have perhaps 12 hours before Sauron's next assault reaches the city walls," Gandalf replied. "I find that is usually sufficient time for the conversations that matter." He turned his horse toward Minas Tirith. "Come, there are people you need to meet, and some of them will trust you immediately, and some of them will not trust you at all, and knowing in advance which is which will save considerable time." Chief looked at Palmer. Palmer looked at Chief. 12 hours, she said. "Enough time to set a perimeter," he said. "Get the Spartans oriented. Full defensive spread around the infinity. I don't want anything approaching the ship without our knowing about it." He paused. "And get me a full readout from the weapon on that energy signature. Everything she has." He started walking toward Minas Tirith, and behind him the infinity sat in its furrow, like a grounded iron mountain, its running lights blinking in the ancient dark. And somewhere in the depths of Barad-dûr, the Eye of Sauron turned from the southeast and looked northwest for the first time in an age, drawn by something it had never felt before, a mind it could not read, a will it could not find purchase on, a presence that sat in the field of its perception like a stone in water, taking the current and not moving. Sauron had broken the will of kings. He had corrupted the wise and the strong and the ancient. He had reached through 9 rings and remade 9 men into instruments of his purpose. He had never, in all the long ages of his existence, encountered a consciousness that was simply not afraid. He looked at the thing that had fallen from the sky and thought, for the first time in a very long time, that he might need to reconsider his approach. Deep in the infinity's damaged systems, in the processing space she had carved out of the ship's surviving architecture, the weapon ran her analysis of the local energy field for the 9th time and arrived at the same conclusion she had arrived at 8 times previously, which she was beginning to accept was not going to change no matter how many times she verified it. The energy was real. It was atmospheric and geological and biological simultaneously, threaded through the world the way gravity was threaded through space. Not a force applied from outside, but a property of the place itself. intrinsic, ancient, even self-consistent in ways that her models could describe mathematically, but could not explain causally. It responded to intention in ways that her sensors could measure, but her physics database could not account for. It was stronger near Gandalf than near anyone else she had scanned, which her models correlated with something she was filing under moral authority for lack of a better classification. And it was present in trace amounts in the ring. She had detected it when Gandalf rode past. A small golden object on a chain around his neck, carried close, carried carefully, radiating the local energy field at an intensity that was completely disproportionate to its physical size. Not Gandalf's ring. She had already classified the 3 elven rings from the trace signatures of their bearers in the city. This was something else. Something that was concentrating the local energy field the way a lens concentrated light, focusing it to a point, and at that point, the reading was so far outside her measurement parameters that her sensors were simply returning the same notation over and over. Unknown, unknown, unknown. She flagged it for Chief's attention with the highest priority notation in her system and added a single line of analysis that she had been reluctant to write because it was outside the bounds of what she could verify, but was inside the bounds of what her pattern recognition was insisting on. Whatever that object is, it is the reason we are here. If you want to see more legendary warriors fall into worlds that shouldn't be able to contain them, then hit that subscribe button and drop your dream crossover in the comments below. Let's find out what happens when the future meets the ancient dark. The war council in Minas Tirith lasted 3 hours, which was 2 hours and 50 minutes longer than Chief would have preferred, and approximately 40 minutes shorter than Gandalf had warned him to expect. The chamber was stone and firelight, maps on the table that showed a geography Chief had no database entry for, faces around it that ranged from cautious to openly hostile in a distribution that matched Gandalf's pre-briefing prediction with uncomfortable accuracy. Aragorn, king-in-waiting, a ranger, the kind of leader Chief recognized across the barrier of completely different contexts, because leadership of a specific quality had a physical signature that training eventually made visible, had extended his hand within the first 30 seconds and looked Chief in the visor with the directness of a man who had decided to make a judgment and was comfortable owning it. Legolas had studied Chief's armor with the focused attention of a warrior cataloging a new weapon system. Gimli had asked, with the blunt practicality of someone who considered directness a courtesy, whether Chief's people knew how to fight or merely how to operate machinery. Chief had told him both. Gimli had nodded as if this was the correct answer and returned to his axe. Denethor had not attended. His seat was empty, and the explanation given was illness, which Gandalf's expression suggested was accurate in the technical sense and incomplete in every other. Theoden of Rohan sat at the table's far end with the particular posture of a king who had recently survived something that had tried to hollow him out and had not entirely finished deciding what he was now that it had failed. He looked at Chief the way soldiers looked at things they had not decided whether to trust, not with hostility, but with the specific reserve of someone who had trusted the wrong things recently and was applying a more rigorous standard going forward. "What can your weapons do that ours cannot?" Theoden asked. It was a soldier's question, stripped of political framing, and Chief respected it for that. "Range," Chief said. "Precision at range, sustained rate of fire, armor penetration against any physical target, regardless of size." He paused. We can put ordnance on a target at 3 kilometers with accuracy that your archers cannot match at 300 meters. We can sustain that rate of fire without fatigue. We can operate at night without light sources." He paused again. "What we cannot do is what your people can do. We have no answer for the Nazgûl in wraith form. Our weapons pass through them. Whatever they are, the weapon tells me they exist partially outside physical space. Our ordnance doesn't have a mechanism for engaging something that isn't fully material." "The Nazgûl fear light and fire," Gandalf said. "Then we combine them," Chief said. He looked at Aragorn. "Your people carry torches. My people carry weapons that produce plasma at temperatures your torches can't approach. If the Nazgûl fear light, we can produce more light than they've ever encountered." He looked at the map. "But I need to understand the full order of battle. What Sauron has, where it's positioned, what's already moving." Aragorn laid it out. The Western army, what remained of it after the Pelennor, was holding the city. The eastern approaches were compromised. The Sauron's forces had not withdrawn after the Pelennor, but had consolidated in the passes, blocking the road to the Black Gate. The Rohirrim were reforming. The dead men of Dunharrow had been released and were no longer available. Faramir was recovering from injuries. The Eagles were independent and unpredictable, and 2 halflings were somewhere in Mordor, carrying the one object whose destruction would end everything. Chief processed this with the attention he gave to strategic situations that required understanding several simultaneous constraints simultaneously. "How long do they need?" he asked. Gandalf was quiet for a moment. "I cannot say with certainty. The ring's pull on its bearer intensifies the closer he comes to the mountain. The journey is days if they are not intercepted." He paused. "What I can say is that Sauron's eye must be drawn away from Mordor's interior. If he turns his full attention inward, if he looks for what moves within his own lands, they will not reach the mountain." "You need a distraction," Chief said. "I need something that Sauron has never seen and cannot immediately understand," Gandalf said. "Something that commands his attention so completely that he cannot spare the focus to look inward." He looked at Chief steadily. "When your vessel tore through the dimensional barrier above the Pelennor, the eye turned toward it. In 30 years of fighting this war, I have never seen the eye turn away from Mordor's interior voluntarily." He paused. "You are that distraction. The question is whether you can be that distraction long enough and survive it." Chief looked at the map. He looked at the Black Gate, Morannon, the massive fortified entrance to Mordor, closed and garrisoned, and designed to be the last word in what happened to armies that approached it. He looked at the distance between Minas Tirith and that gate. "We march on the Black Gate," he said. It was not a question. "It is likely a death march," Theoden said quietly. Not pessimistically, honestly, in the way that experienced soldiers were honest about tactical situations that had predictable outcomes. "I've been on those before," Chief said. He looked at Theoden. "The difference is whether what happens there matters, if it buys enough time." "It matters," Aragorn said. He said it simply, with the weight of a man who had been carrying the full implications of this plan for longer than anyone else in the room and had made his peace with it. "It matters completely," Chief nodded. He looked at Palmer, who had been standing 3 steps behind him throughout the council, with the expression she wore when she was running tactical assessments and keeping them to herself until asked. Palmer. "Already building the deployment plan," she said. "I want Spartans on point, ODSTs on the flanks, Warthog-mounted guns on the perimeter. We'll need to move the Infinity's surviving Scorpions overland. The terrain's going to be rough, but they'll manage." She paused. "And I want Legolas and anyone else who can do what he does integrated into our sniper lines." I watched him work on the Pelennor approach. His range and accuracy are, I don't have a tactful way to say this, better than our human marksmen. Legolas, who had been listening with the particular stillness of someone who missed very little, inclined his head in what Chief interpreted as acknowledgement. "One more thing," Chief said to the room. He looked at Gandalf. "The object the halflings are carrying. The weapon flagged it when you rode past the Infinity. She says it's the reason we're here. That its energy signature is what pulled us through." He paused. "I need to understand what happens when it's destroyed. What changes. It's whether we'll still be here or whether whatever brought us through pulls us back." The room was quiet. Gandalf looked at Chief with an expression that was not evasion, but was not certainty either. The expression of a being who had deep knowledge and honest limits simultaneously. "I believe," he said carefully, "that the forces which move through this world are not indifferent to the presence of those who arrive in its hour of need. But I cannot promise you a return passage. John." He used the name quietly, and Chief registered that Gandalf had extracted it from somewhere. From the briefing Palmer had given Aragorn's people, from conversation, from whatever means the old man used to know things he had no obvious way of knowing. "What I can promise is that your presence here is not accidental. Nothing that has happened in the last age of this world has been accidental." Chief processed that. He found he had nothing to say to it that would be more useful than silence. "Then we move at dawn," he said. "The integration of UNSC technology with Middle-earth's military capacity happened over the following 18 hours in the specific productive chaos that occurred whenever two completely different engineering traditions were introduced to each other by a common enemy and a ticking clock. The dwarves were the fastest adapters. Chief had expected this based on nothing more than the look in Gimli's eyes when he had toured the Infinity's surviving weapons bay. The look of a craftsman encountering new material, assessing it not with awe, but with the practical attention of someone who was already thinking about applications. Within 6 hours, dwarf smiths working alongside the Infinity's armory crew had begun the process of adapting UNSC munitions casings to dwarvish forging techniques, producing a hybrid projectile that maintained the penetration characteristics of UNSC ordnance while being manufacturable in quantities that Middle-earth's existing production infrastructure could sustain. They were not quiet about the work, and they were not modest about their opinions of it, and the armory crew had responded to this with the particular esprit of technicians who had found collaborators who understood what they were doing. And the result was loud and productive, and generated 3 minor explosive incidents that everyone agreed were educational. The elves were more deliberate. Legolas had brought 6 other elvish archers to Chief's attention, each with the same preternatural accuracy and the same capacity for sustained precision that had impressed Palmer on the Pelennor. And the integration that Roland suggested and the weapon implemented was elegant. Elvish marksmanship combined with UNSC targeting reticles. The AI's real-time battlefield analysis fed through a heads-up display that translated the data into something compatible with Elvish sensory processing. The result was an archer who could already hit targets at 600 meters, given a new capacity to identify priority targets across an entire battlefield simultaneously, coordinating fire with a precision that no purely human sniper team could match. Chief watched a test sequence from the Infinity's forward observation point. 6 elvish archers in a coordinated volley pattern, Roland calling targets, the arrows hitting simultaneously at ranges between 200 and 800 meters, with a dispersion that Roland assessed as superior to anything the UNSC's own sniper teams could produce at the longer ranges. "That's unsettling," Palmer said, standing beside him. "That's an asset," Chief said. The Rohirrim's integration was different, not technological, but tactical. Theoden's cavalry was extraordinarily effective in open terrain engagements, and the question Palmer had spent most of the night working on was how to use that effectiveness in a coordinated structure with Warthog-mounted guns and Spartan fire teams. The answer she arrived at was built around a principle that the Rohirrim understood intuitively, and the Spartans could execute with machine precision. Layered assault, a cavalry creating the breach and the chaos, Spartans and Warthogs exploiting it before the enemy could consolidate. The timing requirements were demanding. The Rohirrim's response was, to a rider, that demanding timing was what they had horses for. The night before the march, Chief stood at the edge of the Pelennor and looked east. The weapon spoke through his helmet's comm system, in which she had been using for their private conversation since the crash, a channel that felt oddly appropriate for the kind of conversations that were better held quietly, without an audience. "I've been running analysis on the ring's energy signature continuously since we arrived," she said. "I want to tell you what I've found." "Tell me." "The ring operates through desire," she said. "Specifically through the desire of the person carrying it. It amplifies what they want most and offers itself as the means to have it. The amplification is targeted. It focuses on the deepest want, the one the carrier has been managing and suppressing and working around, and it makes that want feel like the most reasonable thing in the world." She paused. "It doesn't create the desire. It finds what's already there and turns up the volume until nothing else is audible." Chief was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me it could affect the Spartans?" "I'm telling you it could affect anyone," she said, "including you. The augmentations don't filter it. I've been looking for a mechanism that would give Spartan neural architecture immunity, and I haven't found one. The ring operates below the level that augmentation addresses. It operates at the level of what a person wants, which is not a biological process that can be filtered." She paused. "What I can do is monitor. I can watch the neural architecture of every Spartan on the battlefield for the signature changes that precede ring-influenced decision-making. I can give you warning." Another pause. "I can't give you immunity." "What do I want?" Chief said. It was a question he had not asked himself in a long time, and he was asking it now not as introspection, but as threat assessment. "I don't know completely," she said. "That's what makes you difficult to model. Most people's deepest desire is legible from the outside. The things they've lost, the things they've been denied, the things they protect most carefully. Yours are..." She paused in the way she paused when she was choosing precision over speed. "Yours are very quiet, which might mean they're very well managed, or it might mean they're very deep." Another pause. "Either way, I'll be watching." "Good," he said. Below him, the Pelennor was dark and the fires were out, and the world was quiet in the way it got quiet before things that were not quiet at all. To the east, the light from Barad-dûr had changed. It was narrower now, more focused, pointing not at the horizon, but at a specific point that Roland's analysis put approximately in the direction of Mount Doom. The eye had found something, or was looking for something. Chief opened the command channel. "Palmer, move up the departure. I want to be on the road in 4 hours. "Understood." A pause. "Chief, Roland's been tracking something in the Mordor interior for the last 2 hours. There's a third energy signature, not the ring, not the ambient field. Something moving, something that used to be a man." Chief looked at the beam of light pointing into Mordor's heart. "I know," he said. "That's why we need to move." The march to the Black Gate took 3 days. Not because the distance required it. Under normal operational conditions, with warthogs and the surviving Scorpion tanks moving at road speed, Chief's forces could have covered the ground in a fraction of that time. The terrain was the first constraint. The road through Ithilien was broken and narrow in places, designed for the passage of armies on foot, rather than armored vehicles weighing 40 tons. And the engineering work required to make it passable for the Scorpions fell to ODST pioneer teams, working alongside Gondorian engineers who had never seen a vehicle that size, and approached the problem with the combination of professional curiosity and practical urgency that Chief had come to recognize as the signature of people who were good at their work. The second constraint was the sky. Fell beasts. Not Nazgûl mounted. The Nazgûl had not yet reappeared since the Pelennor, which Gandalf read as Sauron holding them in reserve rather than depleting them in probing actions. These were unmounted, feral, enormous winged creatures that operated in loose hunting groups and had apparently been directed southward along the Ithilien road by whatever passed for Sauron's aerial reconnaissance doctrine. They were not intelligent in any tactical sense. They were, however, very large and very fast, and capable of taking a pelican out of the air if they hit it at the right angle, which Roland had determined after the first encounter on day 1 of the march, and had communicated to the pilots in the specific tone he used when he had calculated something unpleasant and considered it his professional obligation to share it promptly. The elvish archers handled them. Chief watched from the Warthog's passenger seat as Legolas and his integrated fire team tracked a fell beast at 400 meters altitude. Of Roland's targeting data feeding through the heads-up display they had calibrated the previous night, and the coordinated volley that followed was brief and absolute. 6 arrows in under 2 seconds, hitting the creature's wing membrane at precisely the points Roland's structural analysis had identified as load-bearing, and the fell beast came down in the road 200 meters ahead of the column, in a way that stopped being a threat and started being an engineering obstacle. Gimli, riding in the Warthog's rear seat, watched this with his arms crossed and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Elves." "Effective," Chief said. "Annoyingly so," Gimli agreed, and said nothing further on the subject. The Allied column that moved up the Ithilien road was unlike anything Middle-earth had produced in any of its ages. A thing that would have been impossible to describe to anyone who had not seen it. A fusion of completely different military traditions that should not have worked, and worked, because the people executing it had decided it would work, and were too competent, and too pressed for time to allow for any alternative. Spartans on point and flanks, moving with the ground-eating efficiency of soldiers who had been trained to cover distance as a tactical asset. Warthogs and the two functional scorpions on the road's paved sections, flanked by Rohirrim cavalry who had spent 2 days learning to operate in coordinated intervals with vehicles, and had arrived at a working relationship with the Warthog drivers that involved a great deal of gestural communication and appeared to be entirely functional. Gondorian infantry in the column's center reorganized into fire teams and issued the hybrid munitions the dwarfsmiths had been producing in Minas Tirith's forges since the night of the council. In elvish archers distributed through the column at regular intervals, Roland's targeting network linking them in a coordinated fire grid that covered the column's full length. Aragorn rode at the column's head beside Chief. They had not talked much during the march, not from distance, but from the specific compatibility of two people who understood that silence was a form of communication that didn't require words to carry meaning. On the evening of the second day, as the column made camp in the ruins of an Ithilien outpost, Aragorn had said, "You've done this before. March towards something you couldn't beat with certainty, holding a line so something else could finish it." "Yes," Chief said. "Did it work?" Chief was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he said. "The times it didn't, the line held anyway. The something else didn't finish it, but the line holding bought time for other things." He looked at the eastern sky, where Barad-dûr's light was visible even at this distance, that constant searching beam. Holding the line is never wasted, even when you lose. Aragorn was quiet for a long moment. "I find that I believe you," he said, "though I am not certain whether that is because it is true or because I need it to be." "Both can be true," Chief said. Aragorn nodded slowly, looking east. "Both can be true," he agreed. The weapon detected the change in Spartan Oros on the morning of the third day. She had been running her monitoring protocol continuously since the march began, a passive scan of the neural architecture signatures of every Spartan in the force, watching for the specific pattern she had described to Chief on the Pelennor, the precursor to ring-influence decision-making, which her analysis of Gandalf's historical briefings had allowed her to characterize as a gradual shift in the weighting given to competing priorities, in the slow elevation of personal desire above tactical objective without the subject being aware of the reweighting occurring. Spartan Caius Oros was a Spartan 3, a veteran of 3 campaigns, a soldier whose file described him as methodical, disciplined, and notably resistant to the stress responses that degraded decision-making in prolonged engagements. Nothing in his file would have flagged him as a vulnerability. Nothing in his performance over the 3 days of the march would have flagged him either. He had operated with the precision and competence that his record predicted, held his positions, executed his assignments, been exactly what his training had made him. The shift was subtle. The weapon almost missed it. What she detected was not a dramatic change, not the sudden, visible corruption that folklore attributed to the ring's influence. It was quieter than that. A 3% reweighting in how Oros's decision modeling allocated priority to tactical objectives versus personal ones. A slight increase in processing time when orders conflicted with instinct. A pattern in his movement over the previous 6 hours that, plotted on a map, described a slow drift eastward, not away from the column, not dramatically, but consistently, every rest break taken at the easternmost point available, Every patrol assignment executed with a bias toward the Mordor-facing flank. She flagged it immediately and opened the private channel to Chief. "Oros," she said. Chief processed the data she sent without breaking stride. He was on foot, moving alongside the column's eastern flank, and he did not change his pace or his heading in any way that would have been visible to anyone watching. "How long?" he asked. "The pattern begins approximately 14 hours ago," she said, "which correlates with our closest approach to the ring's position. When Frodo and Sam were moving through the pass above us, before they descended into Mordor proper." She paused. "The ring doesn't need proximity to function, but proximity appears to amplify the rate of influence. Oros has been moving closer to where the ring was, even after it moved away, because the pattern was already established and the desire was already elevated." "What does he want?" The weapon paused. "His squad," she said. "He lost his original squad, Spartan 3 Training Company, 14 years ago. Not in combat, in a training accident. A decision made above him, without him, that he was never given a sufficient explanation for. He has been carrying that for 14 years with the specific quality of a person who processed it correctly and filed it, and continued functioning and never stopped carrying it." Another pause. "The ring found it. And the ring is offering him. I can't be certain exactly what it's offering, but the desire it's amplifying is the desire to have made a different choice, to have been there, to have..." She stopped. "It's offering him something that isn't real, and that he knows isn't real, and he's walking toward it anyway, because the feeling of it is real, and his filtering systems have been quietly compromised for 14 hours. Chief stopped walking. He turned and located Oros in the column, eastern flank, in exactly where the weapons drift analysis predicted, moving with the normal appearance of a Spartan on patrol, and the subtly wrong directionality of someone who was being slowly redirected by something they couldn't feel happening. He opened a direct channel. "Oros." A pause. "Chief." "Stand down from patrol. Report to the column center. You're rotating to interior security." A pause that was 1 second longer than it should have been. "Understood." Chief watched him turn, watched the drift correct as the direct order gave his compromised filtering system something external to orient around. Watched him move toward the column center with the visible effort of someone pushing through something they couldn't identify. He opened the command channel. "Palmer, Oros is rotating to interior security. No exterior assignments for the remainder of the march. No solo operations. He stays in a fire team at all times." "Understood," Palmer said. Then, after a brief pause, "How many others?" "The weapon is watching. So far, just Oros." Chief started moving again. "But Sauron knows we're here. He knows we're coming. And he's had 3 days to figure out that our weapons are physical, and our soldiers are augmented, and our technology is extraordinary." He paused. "He's going to stop trying to fight us the way he fights armies. He's going to start trying to fight us the way he fights individuals." "The ring," Palmer said. "The ring is in Mordor," Chief said. "But his will isn't limited to the ring. The ring is just where his power is concentrated. His influence, the ambient version, the slow burn corruption, that operates everywhere in his territory. And we've been in his territory for 3 days." He looked at the Barad-dûr beam. "We need to get to the Black Gate before he has more time to work with." they reached the Morannon on the morning of the 4th day. On and the Black Gate was everything the briefings had described, and more than Chief's tactical models had fully accounted for. It was enormous in the specific way that things were enormous when they had been built to communicate a message rather than simply to function. The towers flanking the gate visible from 5 kilometers out, the wall running in both directions until it disappeared into the mountain rock. In the gate itself, 2 vast iron doors that were closed with the particular finality of something that had been designed to make the idea of opening it seem not worth considering. Behind it, through Roland's sensors, the force disposition was dense. Orc battalions in echelon, troll units positioned at the gate's interior, aerial assets on elevated platforms, and something larger that Roland classified as heavy assault and couldn't further specify because his database had no category for it. That the Allied force deployed in the approach terrain with the efficiency of the previous day's coordination. Spartans and Gondorian infantry forming the front line, Scorpions taking elevated positions on the flanking ridges, Rohirrim cavalry spread in the open ground where their mobility would be most effective, Elvish archers integrated through the line. The Warthog guns covered the flanks. The ODST pioneer teams had spent the previous night placing the hybrid munitions, dwarvish manufactured, the UNSC specification, in the kill zones that Roland's terrain analysis had identified as the approach corridors the gate's garrison would use on sortie. Chief stood at the front of the Allied line and looked at the gate. Gandalf stood beside him, leaning on his staff, looking at the gate with the expression of a being who had been looking at this problem for a very long time and was making peace with the fact that looking at it from this angle was the only version of the solution that had ever been available. "They will open it," Gandalf said. "The Eye will see us here, and Sauron will open it, because what we represent is an affront he cannot leave unaddressed. His pride is his oldest weakness." He paused. "It's what comes through will be everything he has." "Good," Chief said. Gandalf looked at him. "You find that encouraging." "Everything he has pointed at us," Chief said, "is everything he doesn't have pointed inward." He checked his MA5D, a motion so habitual it was almost unconscious, the way some people touched a coin in their pocket. "That's the job." Gandalf was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular tone of someone who had found a thing worth saying and had decided to say it, "I have walked this world for many ages, John. I have seen kings and warriors and powers beyond ordinary reckoning. I have never seen anything quite like you." He paused. "Not because of what you are, because of what you've chosen to be, given what you are." Another pause. "The ring has been reaching for you since we arrived. I have been watching it. It has not found a door." Chief said nothing for a moment. He thought about what the weapon had said on the Pelennor. "Your desires are very quiet," and what that meant, and whether quiet was the same as absent, and whether the absence of a door was a permanent condition or a temporary one. "It'll find one eventually," he said. "Everything finds a door eventually." "Yes," Gandalf said. "That is why what happens in Mordor today matters more than what happens here." He looked east, us toward the mountain. "We are the distraction, they are the solution." He straightened. "Let us be a very good distraction." The Black Gate began to open. The sound it made was not mechanical. It was geological, tectonic, the sound of something that had been designed to be a statement, making the statement at full volume. The iron doors moved with the slowness of things that weighed what they weighed, and behind them, in the gap that widened with each second, the darkness of Mordor's interior was visible. Not the darkness of an absence of light, but the darkness of a presence of something else. Something that had been building in that valley for an age, and was now directed outward with the full weight of a will that had been preparing this moment since the eye first turned toward the thing that had fallen from the sky. They came out in waves. Orc battalions first, tens of thousands, yet trolls behind them, enormous and armored. Trolls behind them, enormous and armored, and carrying weapons that were less weapons than geological features given handles. And above them, wheeling in from the towers on either side of the gate, the fell beasts. Not the feral hunting groups from the Ithilien road, but the battle-trained variant, larger, coordinated, moving in the formation patterns of aerial assault units that had been drilling this approach for longer than Chief had been alive. Chief looked at the wave coming toward him. He looked at the allied line, the Spartans and soldiers and cavalry and archers that had been built into a fighting force over 4 days of hard work and genuine mutual respect. And he felt the specific quality of readiness that was not confidence and not resignation, but the thing between them, and the thing that accepted what was coming and met it without flinching and kept moving regardless. He raised his MA5D. "Spartans," he said on the command channel. "This is what we came here for. Hold the line. Hold it until it's done." He paused. Deep runs. Palmer's voice came back immediately. The words, the same words she always used when the situation was as bad as it appeared, and complaining was a luxury they didn't have. Deep runs. The line echoed it, Spartan by Spartan, down the formation. The phrase moving through the command network like a current, each voice adding to it. And then the Gondorian infantry, who didn't know the words but understood the tone, raised their voices in something that wasn't the phrase, but was the same thing the phrase meant. And then the Rohirrim, and then something wordless from the elvish archers that needed no translation. The Blackgate's army hit the Allied line at 0800 hours. The Battle of the Morannon had begun. The first hour at the Black Gate was the loudest thing Chief had ever experienced, and he had experienced things that had reshaped planetary surfaces. The sound was not a single sound. It was a layered accumulation of sounds that had no gaps between them, each one arriving before the previous had finished, building into a continuous texture of noise that the human auditory system processed not as individual events, but as a weather condition. The battle rifles firing in the sustained cadence of Spartans who had calibrated their ammunition conservation to the scale of the engagement. Scorpion tank rounds hitting troll formations with the specific concussive signature of ordnance meeting density and winning. The Rohirrim cavalry in their cycling assault pattern, charge, break, reform, charge again. Their horses finding rhythm in the chaos with the trained instinct of animals that had been bred for this for generations. On the fell beasts screaming overhead, a sound that had no analog in the UNSC's entire catalog of hostile biological audio, and that operated on the nervous system at a frequency below rational processing, producing a flinch response that Spartan conditioning suppressed, but could not fully eliminate. And beneath all of it, constant and structural, the pressure of Sauron's will, not louder than the battle sounds, but more pervasive, I'd threaded through everything, the way a foundation was threaded through a building, felt in the feet before it was felt in the mind. Chief moved through the Gondorian infantry's forward line and into the gap between the 1st and 2nd Orc battalions with the deliberate momentum of a soldier who had decided where the work was and was going there directly. His battle rifle was a constant at his right shoulder, firing in precise, controlled bursts that the orcs' crude armor could not stop, and their numbers could not compensate for. A troll turned toward him from the eastern flank, and he put 4 armor-piercing rounds through its knee joint at 12 meters, dropping it across the path of the battalion behind it, and producing a collision that Roland assessed from the Infinity's monitoring position as removing approximately 200 orcs from the forward advance through kinetic interference alone. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting to be visible, to be the most immediately threatening thing on the battlefield, the focus of maximum enemy attention, the variable that Sauron's tactical mind could not set aside. Every orc battalion that turned toward him was an orc battalion not pressing the Gondorian center. Every troll that committed to his position was a troll not at the Rohirrim flanks. Yes, every moment the eyes spent tracking the Spartan in the silver armor, moving through its forces like a blade through dark water, was a moment the eye was not looking inward at the wasteland of Mordor's interior. He was bait. He was the most expensive bait in the history of warfare, and he was doing the job with everything he had. Palmer ran the command net from the Warthog's elevated position at the formation's rear. Roland's battlefield analysis feeding her a continuously updated picture of an engagement that was going approximately as well as an engagement this strategically suicidal could go, which was to say it was going badly in all the ways they had planned for, and not yet badly in the additional ways they hadn't. The Gondorian center was holding. Aragorn was in it, which Chief had assessed correctly as a force multiplier that no tactical model fully captured. Because there was something about the way he fought that communicated itself to the soldiers around him. A quality of absolute commitment that was contagious in the specific way that courage was contagious, when it was genuine rather than performed. Theoden's Rohirrim were cycling with the precision that their integration training had built. The coordination between cavalry charge timing and warthog fire suppression was working. The warthogs creating the gaps the horses drove through. The horses creating the chaos the warthogs exploited. The elvish archers were taking the Nazgûl apart. This was the part Palmer had been least certain would work, and was now watching with the focused attention she gave to things that were exceeding their projected performance. The Nazgûl on their fell beasts were aerial threats that neither Gondorian arrows nor UNSC standard ballistics addressed cleanly. The beasts were fast, and the Nazgûl themselves had that partial existence quality that made solid projectiles unreliable. But Roland's targeting integration with the elvish archers was doing something she hadn't fully anticipated when she designed it. The AI's predictive modeling of the fell beast's flight patterns, and fed through the heads-up display to archers whose physical accuracy was already beyond human norms, was producing intercept shots at ranges and angles that turned the Nazgûl's speed from an asset into a liability. 3 fell beasts down in the first 40 minutes. The remaining 6 had pulled back to the upper air column, circling at a range that kept them outside the effective envelope of the targeting integration. The Nazgûl were learning too. "Roland," Palmer said, "me ring indicators. 7 Spartans currently showing elevated neural deviation," Roland replied. "All within the weapon's monitoring parameters. None approaching the threshold Chief established for intervention. A pause. The indicators are stronger across the formation than they were last night. The proximity effect is real and increasing. Chief knows? The weapon is feeding him continuous updates. Palmer looked at the battle. She looked at the numbers. The orc casualties mounting in Roland's running tally, enormous and ultimately insufficient against the reserves still pouring through the Black Gate. An inexhaustible dark river that Sauron's forces represented, and UNSC firepower could thin, but not stop. She looked at the Scorpion's ammunition status. 63% on the lead tank, lower on the others. She looked at the Warthog-mounted gun's heat signatures, in 2 of them running hot in ways that would require a firing pause within the next 20 minutes. She looked at Mount Doom on the horizon. "How long?" she said. Not to Roland, to the sky, to the calculation, to the gap between what they had and what the mission needed. Roland answered anyway, because he was Roland, and answering was what he did. Based on the halfling's last estimated position and movement rate, assuming no significant obstacles encountered since our last data point. A pause that contained a great deal of processing. Somewhere between 40 minutes and 3 hours. That's not a useful range. No, Roland agreed. It isn't. The ring found its door at the 2-hour mark. Chief was in the middle of the engagement when the weapons alert came through. Not the peripheral monitoring alerts that had been updating constantly since the battle began. The steady stream of elevated indicators and watch statuses, but a full priority interrupt that pushed everything else to secondary in his visor display. Spartan Darak 044. Neural deviation. Threshold exceeded. Last confirmed position. Eastern edge of Gondorian line. Current position, unknown. Time since last position. Confirmation, 11 minutes. Chief processed this in the second between firing and reloading. Darak. Heavy weapons. The Spartan who had taken down Metal Gear Ray units in a South American jungle, what felt like a lifetime ago and several universes away, who had held the Sharan Compact's central junction alongside Alpha 1, whose service record was as long as it was unambiguous. A Spartan who had been through more than most and carried it without obvious cost, and was precisely the kind of soldier whose deepest want would be very quiet and very deep. He opened the command channel to the weapon. Where is he going? East-northeast, she said. Consistent with the approach route to Mordor's interior. He's moving fast. He's not walking, he's running, and he's not using the terrain for cover, which means he's past the stage of being aware that he's doing something he shouldn't. A pause. Chief, he's been gone 11 minutes. At Spartan running pace in this terrain, he's already 2 kilometers inside the Mordor approach. 2 kilometers, moving fast. Alone, though in the wasteland between the Morannon and the mountain, in the territory where Sauron's remaining forces operated as patrols, and where the ring's influence would only strengthen the closer he got to it. Chief ran the calculation the way he ran all calculations under fire. Fast, complete, unsentimental about the outcome. Leaving the battle line to pursue Darak meant removing himself from the primary engagement, in reducing the visibility and threat concentration that was keeping Sauron's attention on the gate rather than on Mordor's interior. It meant the mission, the actual mission, the one that everything else was in service of, took a step toward failure for every step he took east. Staying in the battle line meant leaving a Spartan 3 alone in Mordor, moving toward the One Ring at full speed, in a state that the weapons model described as past the threshold of voluntary return. He looked at the battle around him. He looked at Aragorn in the Gondorian center, fighting with that quality of commitment that was doing the work of 3 men. He looked at the Rohirrim cycling on the flanks. He looked at the elvish archers holding the upper air column clear of Nazgûl. He looked at the machine that the last 30 hours had built, imperfect, improvised, the product of 2 completely different military traditions, finding their overlap under extreme pressure. And he assessed it with the honesty that the moment required. It would hold without him. Not indefinitely. The ammunition constraints and the weight of numbers would eventually tell. But for the time a pursuit and return required, the line would hold. He opened the command channel. "Palmer, I'm leaving the line. You have command." A pause. "Sir, understood." Palmer's voice had the quality it had when she was suppressing a question she had decided not to ask because she trusted the decision had already been made. "How long?" "As long as it takes." He was already moving east. "Keep the gate loud. Keep Sauron's attention forward." "Chief." Her voice stopped him for the half-second it took to hear what came next. "Bring him back." He found Darak at the 3-kilometer mark, which was farther than he'd expected, and told him something useful about how far gone the ring's influence had progressed. The Spartan was moving through the volcanic rock of Mordor's outer wasteland with the single-minded efficiency of a person who had resolved every competing consideration into a single vector and was pursuing it without remainder. He wasn't running anymore. The terrain had slowed him to a fast walk, but the walk had the quality of running, the same absence of hesitation, the same forward lean that communicated the body following a mind that had already arrived somewhere ahead of it. Chief came up behind him and matched pace. He didn't call out. Announcing himself at range in Mordor's outer territory was a way to invite the patrol contact he couldn't afford. He closed the distance in 20 seconds and put his hand on Darak's shoulder. Darak spun and had his weapon up in the same motion. The threat response instantaneous and correct, and fully Spartan. Whatever the ring was doing to his decision-making, it hadn't touched his combat reflexes, which told Chief that the architecture the ring was working on and the architecture that Spartan training occupied were genuinely different territories. "Stand down," Chief said. Darak looked at him through the visor. The battle rifle stayed up for 2 seconds, the longest 2 seconds Chief had experienced in the current engagement, which was saying something given what the previous 2 hours had contained. Then it came down. "Chief." His voice had the quality Adriana's had on the perimeter. The effortful control. The suppression working against something that didn't want to be suppressed. But there was something else in it that Adriana's hadn't had. The specific exhaustion of a person who had been fighting the pull for longer than they'd told anyone. "I knew you'd come after me." "I know," Chief said. I couldn't stop." He said it with the directness of a Spartan assessing his own failure, factual, unsoftened. "I knew what was happening. I knew where I was going. I ran the logic that said it was wrong, and the logic was right, and I couldn't stop." "The ring doesn't work on logic," Chief said. "It works below logic. Knowing the right answer doesn't help when the thing pulling you isn't listening to the part of you that knows things." Darak was quiet for a moment. "What does help?" Chief thought about what had worked on the perimeter. The 4 Spartans, the same approach each time. the thing that had given the pull a name and a direction and a reason that was more immediate than the one the ring was offering. He looked at Darak, and he thought about what Darak's deepest want was, the very quiet, very deep thing that the ring had found the door to. And he understood it with the clarity of a soldier who had spent years reading people through sealed armor. The mission, Chief said, not as an abstraction, as the specific thing that happens in the next hour if we hold the line, and the specific thing that doesn't happen if we don't. He paused. Frodo is 2 kilometers north of us, maybe less. He's carrying what you're being pulled toward. He's already in it, further in it than you'll ever be, at closer range, for longer, and he's still moving forward. He held Darak's gaze. He needs the noise at the gate to keep the eye forward. He needs every second we can buy him. That's the mission. That's what your presence at that gate is worth. He paused. That's what walking away from it cost. Silence. The wasteland around them was quiet in the way that hostile environments were quiet. Not peaceful, but watchful. The silence of a place that was paying attention. "Can you make it back?" Chief said. Darak was quiet for a long moment. The weapon's feed in the corner of Chief's visor showed the neural indicators, still elevated and still above threshold, but the suppression pattern strengthening, the pull losing its competition with something more immediate. "Yes," Darak said. "Then move." They ran back to the gate together. Chief did not track whether the pull was still working on Darak as they ran. The weapon was doing that, the indicators updating in his peripheral vision. And what they showed was a slow and effortful stabilization that held because the thing holding it was the specific quality that Spartan training had been trying to produce since the program's beginning. The capacity to choose the mission over the self, not through suppression of the self, but through the clear-eyed decision that the mission mattered more than what the self wanted. It was not comfortable. It did not get more comfortable. But it held. They cleared the Mordor approach and hit the battle line at the point where the Gondorian center's eastern flank was under the most pressure, and Chief was back in the engagement before his absence had registered as a gap in the defensive pattern. And Darak was beside him with a heavy weapons loadout, and the specific focused intensity of a soldier who had decided what he was doing, and was done being uncertain about it. The mountain erupted at the 3-hour mark, not as a volcanic event, as a signal. A column of fire from the cracks of doom, visible even from the Morannon that rose into the sky and kept rising, too sustained for a geological event and too structured for an accident. And Chief knew what it meant before Roland confirmed it. And Roland confirmed it 4 seconds later in the voice he used for things that were not tactical assessments, but were the largest things. "Chief, the ring is destroyed." The effect on the battlefield was not immediate. That was what surprised Chief most in the moment. The expectation that destruction of the ring would produce an instantaneous change, a clean before and after, the movie version of a world altered by a single event. What happened instead was gradual, and the gradualness of it was somehow more complete than the instant version would have been. First, the orcs stopped coordinating, not stopped fighting, stopped coordinating. The organized battalion structure dissolving into individual threat response as the Sons of Sauron's will withdrew from the network that had been directing them. Each creature left suddenly alone in its own skull, with nothing to serve and nothing to orient by. The Gondorian line, which had been pressing against coordinated pressure, found itself pressing against a crowd instead of an army, and the difference between those two things was everything. Then the Nazgûl, the 6 fell beasts in the upper air column, dropped out of their holding pattern simultaneously, their riders gone between 1 second and the next, not visibly, not with drama, but with the specific quality of things that had never been fully present and were now fully absent. The fell beasts suddenly riderless and panicked and plummeting in the ungainly way of creatures who had been guided by something that was no longer there. Then the tower. Barad-dûr's collapse was visible from the Morannon as a slow-motion dissolution. The dark tower coming apart not from base to peak, but from the inside. The structure that had been held together by will rather than architecture, failing as the will failed. The stones and the iron and the dark purpose that had shaped them for 3,000 years, releasing all at once into the gravity that had been waiting patiently to reclaim them. The eye went dark. A chief stood at the center of the dissolving battle and watched the tower fall and felt the pressure lift. Not gradually, but in a single moment, the weight of Sauron's will that had been threaded through the air and the ground and the back of every mind on the battlefield simply ceasing. The way pain ceased, the specific quality of an absence that was itself a presence, because the absence was what told you how much had been there. Around him, the army of Gondor and Rohan was still for a moment. Then Aragorn's voice, carrying across the field with the quality that made it carry, not volume, but the specific resonance of a voice that had earned the attention it was asking for. The shadow is gone. The sound the army made in response was not a battle cry. It was something older and less organized than a battle cry. The sound of people who had been holding something enormous, realizing they no longer had to hold it. The sound of a weight released. Chief found Gandalf at the edge of the field as the orc remnants scattered and the Rohirrim moved to secure the Morannon's approaches. The old wizard was looking east, toward the mountain, toward the column of fire that was already beginning to dissipate as Mount Doom's eruption moved from signal to consequence. His face had a quality Chief hadn't seen on it before. Not relief exactly, not joy, but the specific expression of someone who has been working toward a single point for a very long time and has reached it and is in the first moments of discovering what it feels like to have arrived. "It's done," Chief said. "It is done," Gandalf agreed. He was quiet for a moment. The ring is gone. Sauron is gone. Not destroyed in the way that permanence is destroyed, but diminished past the point of return. He will not gather himself again. He paused. An age has ended. Chief looked at the ruined field, the orc dead, the allied wounded being moved to the medical positions the Infinity's surviving crew had established, the scorpions sitting with their gun barrels cooling, the elvish archers already standing down from their elevated positions with the quiet efficiency of people who had done what they came to do. He looked at the Infinity in the distance, its running light still active, its crash furrow carved into the Pelennor like a permanent record of the moment the future had landed in the middle of the ancient world. "What happens now?" he said. Gandalf looked at him with the gray eyes that held both storm and clarity. "For this world, a great deal of difficult work, rebuilding, governing, the long, unglamorous effort of peace, which is harder than war in the ways that matter most." He paused. "For you," he looked at the sky, "the force that brought you here was the ring. The ring is gone. I believe the path home will open when the time is right. The world does not usually summon aid and then leave the aid stranded." He paused. Usually, Chief repeated. "I have lived a very long time," Gandalf said, with the tone of someone who had learned to be honest about the limits of his certainty while retaining the capacity to act despite them. "I have found that the forces which move through the world are not careless with the things they choose to move, but they are also not precise in their timing, and I would not pretend otherwise." Chief looked at the infinity. He thought about the weapon in her damaged systems, running her analysis of the ring's residual energy signature, monitoring the neural recovery of 7 Spartans, whose indicators were already returning to baseline now that the source was gone. He thought about Palmer at the Command Warthog. The thought about Darak running back from the UNSC would ever read it, because Palmer filed after action assessments on principle. He thought about Darak running back from the Mordor wasteland with the focused intensity of a soldier who had decided what he was doing. He thought about Adriana on the perimeter in the dark, naming what was pulling at her. He thought about what Gandalf had said at the council. Nothing that has happened in the long age of this world has been accidental. He still wasn't certain he believed it as a general principle. But he found, standing on the battlefield of the Morannon with the shadow gone, and the tower fallen, and the age ended, and his people still standing, that he believed it about this, about the specific weight of this specific moment, and what it had cost, and what it had been worth, and the fact that both of those were real numbers that would not have been the same without everything that had brought them here. The slipspace portal opened at 1847 hours without announcement, in the air above the Pelennor. Roland detected it first and sent the notification to Chief's helmet. In the same moment, he began calculating the transit window. The weapon added her assessment in parallel. The ring's residual energy signature is driving the portal formation, consistent with my hypothesis that its destruction would release the dimensional tension that pulled us here. Window estimated at 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Chief looked at Gandalf. But Gandalf was already looking at the portal. That gray gaze taking it in with the expression of someone unsurprised by the miraculous because they had long since learned that the miraculous and the inevitable were more closely related than they appeared. "It seems the timing is more precise than I suggested," Gandalf said. "It seems so," Chief said. He opened the command channel. "All units, we have a departure window, 40 minutes. Anyone not aboard the Infinity in 35 doesn't come home." He paused. "Move." They moved. The efficiency with which the Infinity's crew and the Spartan complement extracted from the Pelennor in 31 minutes would be the thing Palmer cited most often in later years, when asked what she was proudest of. Not the battle, not the ring's destruction, not any of the tactical decisions that had worked or failed, but the 31-minute extraction, because it was the thing that was entirely within their control, and they had done it with the quality that the people who went home deserved. Chief was the last person aboard. He stood at the Infinity's forward loading ramp for the last 30 seconds of the departure window and looked at Middle-earth. The Pelennor and the crash furrow and Minas Tirith behind its white walls, and the smoke still rising where Barad-dûr had been. The sky clean above it for the first time in an age. The specific quality of light that a world had when the shadow that had been modifying it was gone. Aragorn was there. Of course he was, the king-to-be, standing at the edge of the furrow with Legolas and Gimli and the expression of a man who had won the thing he had spent his entire life working toward, and was in the first hours of learning what came after winning. He raised his hand. Not a wave, a gesture with more weight in it than a wave, in the specific gesture of a soldier acknowledging another soldier across the barrier of everything that made them different. Chief raised his hand in return. He stepped onto the ramp. The ramp closed. The infinity lifted, carrying its people and its damage and its running lights still blinking in the ancient air, and passed through the portal. On the other side, Roland had the star fix in 0.4 seconds and had already begun calculating the route home before Chief had walked from the loading ramp to the bridge. The familiar stars, the familiar coordinates, the specific quality of real space that matched every parameter in his database. All of it exactly right in the way that the wrong Earth had been exactly wrong. The navigation data, the electromagnetic profile, the particular background radiation of their own corner of the galaxy fitting his models the way a key fit the lock it had been made for. "We're home," Roland said. Chief stood on the bridge and looked at the star field. The weapon spoke quietly in the channel she used for the conversations that were better held without an audience. "Chief." "I know," he said. 7 Spartans with elevated neural indicators. All returned to baseline. No persistent deviation." A pause. "Darak's recovery is complete. He filed a self-assessment report 20 minutes after the portal transit." Another pause. "It's thorough. He didn't soften any of it." "He wouldn't," Chief said. "No," she agreed. "He wouldn't." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been running analysis on the ring's mechanism since the destruction, the way it operated, finding the doors, routing around discipline, targeting what was already there rather than introducing something new." She paused. "It was very sophisticated. More sophisticated than anything I've encountered. I don't say that to be alarming." "Why do you say it?" "Because I want to document it accurately," she said. "Because the way it worked is important to understand, not to build defenses against specifically, though that's worth considering, but because the principle it operated on is worth understanding for its own sake." She paused. "It found what people wanted most and made that wanting feel like clarity. The antidote was not suppressing the want. It was having something more immediate to want more." Another pause. "That's a principle that applies beyond the ring, beyond this situation. I think it's a principle about people." Chief thought about Darak in the Mordor wasteland, the battle rifle up for 2 seconds. He thought about Adriana naming the pull in the dark. He thought about what had worked each time, not suppression, but replacement. Not closing a door, but opening a more immediate one. "Document it," he said. "I will," she said. "I am." He looked at the stars. He looked at the infinity around him, damaged, grounded when they'd arrived, running lights still blinking, carrying 17,000 people, and 6 operational pelicans, and whatever the last 72 hours had done to all of them, which was not nothing, and would not be nothing for a long time. He thought about a world behind them where an age had ended, and the difficult work was beginning. He thought about Aragorn raising his hand at the edge of a furrow carved by a ship that should never have been there. He thought about Frodo somewhere on the slopes of a mountain, carrying something he had carried to the end and let go of, and what it cost to carry something to the end and let it go, and whether the cost was worth it, and what worth it even meant when the thing on the other side of the cost was the survival of everything. He thought it was worth it. He thought it was worth it exactly, completely, without remainder. The infinity moved through the stars toward home, carrying its people, carrying its questions, carrying the specific kind of knowledge that could only be acquired by going somewhere you were not supposed to be able to go, and doing what needed to be done there, and coming back changed in the ways that change was worth having. Not comfortable, not resolved, but real and present, and entirely theirs.